Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.
You don't even scream. The guard's voice cut through the darkness of the cell. His massive silhouette blocked what little light filtered through the doorway, azure skin gleaming with sweat in the humid air. That's unusual for a soft blood. Reich lay strapped to the metal table, fresh wounds crisscrossing his torso like a grotesque map. His breathing came shallow, each inhale sending shards of pain through his broken ribs. He said nothing. The guard leaned closer, his breath hot and sour against Reich's face. You know what happens if you catch her eye? The chief? She'll break what you don't have left. Reich's cracked lips parted slightly. Then let her break me properly. The guard's laughter echoed off the stone walls as he slammed the door shut, plunging the cell back into darkness. Alone again, Reich closed his eyes, focusing on the rhythm of his breathing. In, out. Each breath a victory, each moment alive a defiance. 3 weeks earlier, when they first brought him in, Reich had been thrown into a communal holding cell with 7 other humans. Most were already broken, eyes vacant, bodies curled into protective shells. One man, younger than the rest, still had fight in him. Each night, the guards would drag him away. Each morning, they'd throw him back, a little more damaged. On the 5th night, the young man didn't return. Instead, a new prisoner was tossed into the cell. Barely conscious, blood pooling beneath him. The others shrank away, knowing that helping the dying meant sharing their fate. Reich moved forward. Don't, hissed an old-timer, his face a patchwork of scars. They're watching, always watching. Reich ignored him. He tore strips from his already ragged shirt, binding the unconscious man's wounds with practiced hands. When the man moaned in pain, Reich whispered, Quiet now. Breathe with me. The door slammed open. 3 guards entered, azure skin shimmering in the dim light. Playing doctor? Soft blood? The lead guard's voice was almost gentle, almost curious. Reich didn't look up, continuing to work on the injured man. Bring them both, the guard ordered. The healer first. They dragged Reich to a different room, clean, clinical, with instruments laid out in precise rows. A medical bay, converted for purposes never intended by its designers. The injured man was strapped to a table across from him. Here's how it works, the guard explained, selecting a slender metal rod from the array of tools. Every time you scream, we cut him. Every time you beg, we break something else. If you pass out, we wake you. Reich met the guard's eyes. And if I don't? The guard's lipless mouth stretched into what might have been a smile. Then we get creative. They did. For hours that stretched into days, they methodically took him apart. Bones broken and reset, only to be broken again. Skin flayed in precise patterns. Sleep deprivation, starvation, drowning that stopped just short of death. Through it all, Reich remained silent. Not out of bravery or defiance, but because he had discovered something profound in that sterile room. Pain, even at its most extreme, could be separated from suffering. The body would scream, but the mind could choose whether to listen. The injured man lived because Reich never screamed. After 7 days, the guards brought in a new victim. We're starting again, they told him. Reich looked at the frightened newcomer and said the only words he would speak during the entire ordeal. Then you'll need sharper tools. It was then they broke his ribs, not in anger, but with clinical precision, one at a time. The 4th rib punctured his lung, causing it to partially collapse. They left it that way, curious to see how long he could breathe through the pain. That was when the rumors started, whispers of a human who wouldn't break. And somewhere in the complex, a blue-skinned chief heard them. The chief stood on her floating platform, silver braids whipping around her face in the desert wind. Below, the arena stretched like an open wound in the earth, its sand stained dark with the remnants of previous matches. The crowd's roar washed over her, thousands of voices hungry for blood and spectacle. But she barely heard it anymore. Another day, another death. Her eyes drifted over the new batch of prisoners being herded into the holding pens. Pathetic creatures, most of them. Broken before they even stepped foot in the arena. Their fear was palpable, rising like steam from their skin. Predictable, boring. Then she saw him. Unlike the others, he wasn't looking up at the stands or at the guards. His gaze remained fixed on the ground, yet there was something in his posture, a stillness that suggested not defeat, but conservation, as if he were holding something in reserve. They all fear, but this one, it's as if he's already dead, or understood everything. They all screamed. This one didn't. That meant something. Or maybe she just wanted it to. Maybe after thousands of prisoners, thousands of deaths, she was simply desperate for something. Anything. Different. Something worth remembering. Something that would crack the endless cycle of bloodshed that had become her existence. What if he's the one? The one who changes everything. The thought startled her with its sudden clarity, its presumption. Change what? And to what end? She had no answer, only a sudden, visceral certainty that she needed to see this human up close. Without conscious decision, she stepped forward on her platform. The crowd fell instantly silent, their collective breath held in anticipation. She descended in a single fluid motion, drawn to the human by something she couldn't name. I don't need to go down there, she thought. I never do. But she couldn't stop herself from looking closer. 3 days before, she had been reviewing the prisoner manifests, a tedious duty she usually delegated to subordinates. A name caught her attention. Reich. No family name, no origin listed. Just Reich. There was a note attached from the head guard. Unusual tolerance for preparation. Recommended for special exhibition. Show me, she had ordered. The surveillance footage played on the screen before her, grainy but clear enough. A human strapped to a table, body already bearing the marks of extensive preparation. A guard methodically working, applying techniques that would reduce most beings to sobbing wrecks. The human's face remained impassive, not clenched in resistance or twisted in agony, simply elsewhere, as if he had found a way to exist separate from his own tortured flesh. She watched for hours, footage spanning days of his captivity. Not once did he scream, not once did he beg. Even when they broke his ribs, puncturing his lung, his only response was to adjust his breathing. Shallow, careful inhalations that worked around the injury. Something stirred within her, an emotion she hadn't felt in decades. Curiosity. Bring him to my arena tomorrow, she ordered. I want to see him myself. Now standing on her platform, watching him being dragged across the sand, she felt that curiosity deepen. What kind of being could endure such treatment and still maintain that quiet dignity? What secrets lay behind those eyes that seemed to look through the spectacle around him as if it were mist? She had seen thousands of prisoners, broken thousands herself. Why did this one compel her to step off her platform and approach? What was she hoping to discover? Perhaps, she thought, I simply need to see if there's anything left in this universe that can still surprise me. Sand, screams, blood drying in the sun. Reich was dragged into the pit like a sack of bones, his body leaving a dark smear across the scorched arena floor. His arms bound behind his back with fraying synthetic cord that bit into his wrists, drawing thin ribbons of crimson. The guards, massive figures with armored plates grafted to their azure skin, tossed him forward with casual disdain. He landed hard, sending a fresh wave of agony through his already broken body. The crowd's roar swelled as he struggled to his knees. Thousands of them perched on the curved walls of the massive bowl-shaped arena, their varied skin tones, blues, greens, and grays, shimmering under the merciless glare of the desert sun. They stomped and howled, the rhythm of their anticipation vibrating through the ground beneath him. Reich squinted upward through swollen eyes. His ribs jutted grotesquely from beneath his scorched skin, the result of weeks of preparation, the guard's euphemism for the systematic breaking of a prisoner's body and spirit. His breath came in shallow gasps, each one sending spikes of pain through his chest. The crowd wanted a show, and broken humans always provided the best entertainment. High above, the chief stood motionless. She was tall, even for her kind, with blue skin that seemed to absorb the sunlight rather than reflect it. Her face was a mask of perfect, emotionless beauty. High cheekbones, full lips pressed into a firm line, and eyes that held the cold emptiness of deep space. A spear rested in her hand, its tip glinting wickedly. Her eyes burned down on him, not with hate or disgust or even anger, with boredom, the weary disinterest of someone who had seen this spectacle too many times to count. The crowd's chanting grew louder, more insistent. The words were foreign to Reich, but their meaning was clear enough. They wanted blood. his blood. "Another soft blood," someone hissed from nearby, the words barely audible over the crowd's fervor. "Won't last 3 minutes in the trials." Reich kept his eyes fixed on the sand, conserving what little strength remained in his battered body. The desert heat beat down on his exposed back, already blistered and peeling from the journey across the wastelands. Sweat and blood mingled, dripping from his matted hair, onto the arena floor. The chief circled him once, twice, examining him with clinical detachment. Then, without warning, she drove her heel directly into his exposed ribcage, precisely where the bone protruded most prominently. The crack echoed through the silent arena like a gunshot. The crowd leaned in for the scream that always followed, the delicious sound of human agony that would signal the beginning of the day's entertainment. Instead, Reich exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that seemed to empty him completely. "Thank you," he rasped, his voice rough from dehydration, his eyes barely open as he looked up at her. "It was out for weeks." The chief froze. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly, the first genuine emotion to cross her face. The silence stretched, heavy and sudden, broken only by the distant call of scavenger birds circling high above the arena. The sun kept burning, Reich's vision blurred. The last thing he saw before consciousness slipped away was the chief's face, her expression no longer bored, but something much more dangerous, curious. Reich awoke to darkness and the sour smell of unwashed bodies. After the match, which he never got to fight, he had been thrown in the corner of the barracks like trash, his unconscious form landing in a heap on the filthy floor. No one had bothered to bind his wounds or even check if he still lived. The other prisoners kept their distance, huddled in small groups as far from him as the cramped space would allow. He was marked now, touched by the chief herself. That made him either blessed or cursed, and no one wanted to discover which. Pain radiated from every part of his body, but strangely, his breathing came easier. The rib that had been grinding against his lung for weeks had indeed been set back into some semblance of proper position by the chief's kick. It still hurt to inhale deeply, but the knife-edge agony had dulled to a persistent throb. He managed to pull himself into a sitting position against the rough stone wall, wincing as his raw back scraped against it. The barracks were little more than a cave carved into the rock beneath the arena, lit only by bioluminescent fungi that cast everything in a sickly green glow. 20 or 30 prisoners shared the space, most of them alien species Reich couldn't name, though he spotted a few humans huddled together near the water trough. No one spoke to him. No one even looked his way. Later, how much later, he couldn't tell without any natural light to mark the passage of time. A sound at the entrance made every prisoner freeze. The heavy door swung open without a creak. In the sudden shaft of light from the corridor, a tall silhouette stood motionless. No guards accompanied her, no attendants hovered at her shoulders. Just her shadow falling across the room, elongated and distorted by the fungal light. A guard's voice drifted from the corridor, deliberately loud enough to be heard. "You sure he's not contagious, Chief?" Mercy spreads fast in these cells. First you spare one, then another. Soon you'll be asking us to feed them better. Another guard laughed, the sound ugly and sharp. Or maybe it's something else spreading, something more personal. She didn't respond to the veiled warnings, but her back stiffened, her hand moving subtly toward the blade at her hip. The threat was clear. They were watching, documenting, reporting. Her interest in this prisoner had not gone unnoticed by those above her. The door closed partway behind her, not completely shut, a reminder that she was being watched, that this visit was noted. The prisoners pressed themselves against the walls, as if proximity to her might be contagious. Reich didn't move, didn't even lift his head. He could feel her eyes on him like a physical touch. The chief entered the barracks with silent steps, her presence filling the space more completely than her physical form. She moved through the room like a predator, ignoring the other prisoners who shrank from her path. She stopped before Reich, looking down at his huddled form with unreadable eyes. Neither spoke. The silence stretched between them like a living thing, filled with unasked questions and unspoken thoughts. Without a word, she placed something on the ground beside him, a clean strip of cloth, then turned and left as silently as she had come. The door closed, plunging the barracks back into green-tinted darkness. Reich's hand found the cloth in the dim light. It was soft, clean, a luxury in this place of filth and pain. He didn't use it to bind his wounds as intended. Instead, he folded it carefully and tied it around his wrist. A strange token, a marker only he understood. The other prisoners whispered in the darkness, their eyes reflecting the fungal light as they stared at him with new fear and suspicion. The second visit came without warning. 3 days had passed since the chief's first appearance. Reich had used the time to rebuild his strength, forcing himself to eat the meager rations provided, to stretch his damaged muscles despite the pain. The cloth remained tied around his wrist, now stained with sweat and dirt, but still a stark reminder of her inexplicable interest. The barracks door opened during what passed for night in the underground chamber. Most prisoners were asleep, their bodies curled in defensive postures even in unconsciousness. Reich was awake, as he often was, measuring his breaths and cataloging his injuries. She entered alone again, moving with the silent grace of a predator. This time she carried something, a small metal cup. The prisoners who were awake pressed themselves deeper into the shadows, eyes averted from her tall figure. The chief stopped before Reich, her face impassive in the green glow of the fungi. Without a word, she placed the cup on the ground between them. Water gleamed inside it, not the brackish slop from the communal trough, but clear, clean water that caught and reflected the bioluminescent light. Reich looked up at her, then at the cup. His throat burned with thirst, but he made no move to take it. The chief's eyes narrowed slightly. "Drink," she commanded, her voice low and musical despite its hardness. "Why?" His voice was a dry rasp, each word an effort. She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her response was unexpected. "I don't know." Their eyes held for a moment longer. Then with deliberate slowness, Reich reached for the cup. His fingers brushed hers as he took it. A brief, electric contact that seemed to surprise them both. He drank deeply, feeling the cool liquid soothe his parched throat. When he finished, he held the empty cup out to her. She took it, her movements careful, as if handling something fragile. Her fingertips lightly traced the line of his jaw, an exploratory touch that lingered just a moment too long to be clinical. "Not afraid of me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Reich's eyes met hers steadily. "If I say yes, will you stop?" Something flickered in her gaze, surprise perhaps, or a shadow of amusement. She withdrew her hand slowly, the ghost of her touch remaining on his skin. "Your rib?" she asked, the question so quiet it might have been meant only for herself. "Better," he replied simply. "Thank you." She nodded once, then turned and left, taking the cup with her. The door closed behind her with a sound of finality that echoed through the chamber. One of the other humans whispered from the shadows, "What does she want from you?" Reich closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the wall. "I think she's trying to figure that out herself." The third visit was different. A week had passed. Reich's strength was returning, the worst of his wounds beginning to heal. The barracks routine continued unchanged. Meager meals, occasional abuse from the guards, the constant undercurrent of fear that permeated every interaction. She came during the day this time, when all prisoners were present, when the guards were watching. The door opened and conversation died instantly. The chief entered, her blue skin stark against the rough stone walls. Behind her, 2 guards waited in the corridor, their weapons ready. This was official. This was noticed. She walked directly to Reich, who had risen to his feet at her entrance. The other prisoners watched with a mixture of fear and fascination. Whatever was happening between the human and the chief had moved beyond secret visits in the night. "You will come with me," she stated, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a threat. It was simply how things would be. Reich nodded once, his face betraying nothing of the thoughts racing through his mind. The guards stepped forward, hands reaching for restraints, but the chief stopped them with a gesture. "He will not run," she said, certainty in her voice. The walk through the complex was silent, the chief leading, Reich following a step behind, the guards bringing up the rear with obvious confusion at this breach of protocol. Prisoners were always restrained, always controlled, but the chief had spoken, and her word was absolute. They entered a small chamber Reich had never seen before, clean, well lit, with a single bench against one wall. Medical supplies lined a shelf, their purpose unmistakable. "Leave us," the chief ordered the guards. They hesitated, exchanged glances, then reluctantly withdrew, closing the door behind them. Alone with her, Reich waited, standing in the center of the room, his posture straight despite the pain it caused him. "Your ribs need proper treatment," she said finally, gesturing to the bench. "Sit." He complied, watching as she selected bandages and ointments from the shelf. Her movements were precise, practiced. She had done this before, though perhaps not for a prisoner. "Why?" he asked again, the same question from before. Her hands paused in their work. "Because I want to see you fight," she replied, not looking at him. "Not die from infection or a punctured lung." She approached him, bandages in hand. "Remove your shirt." Reich complied, revealing the full extent of his injuries. The broken ribs clearly visible beneath bruised skin, the lacerations from the guard's ministrations, some still seeping blood and clear fluid. The chief's face remained impassive as she began to work, cleaning wounds with clinical efficiency, applying ointment to the worst of the infections. Her touch was cool against his fevered skin, impersonal yet somehow intimate in its care. "You're not what I expected," she said as she wrapped bandages around his torso, stabilizing the broken ribs. "What did you expect?" "Fear." Her eyes met his. "Hatred. Gratitude. The usual responses of the powerless to power." "I'm afraid," he admitted, "but not of you." Her hand stilled against his skin. "What then?" "Dying without meaning." She finished her work in silence, securing the bandages with a small metal clip. When she stepped back, Reich reached for his tattered shirt, but she stopped him with a gesture. From a drawer, she retrieved a clean garment, simple but intact, and handed it to him. "In 3 days you will fight," she said as he pulled the new shirt over his head. "Rest, heal, be ready." As the guards returned to escort him back to the barracks, Reich saw the other prisoners' faces, the fear, the suspicion, the envy. He had been marked even more clearly now. The chief's interest was no longer secret, no longer deniable. Whatever game was being played, he was now a visible piece on the board. She came again the following day, and the day after that. Sometimes she brought water or strips of dried meat. Sometimes she brought nothing at all but her presence. She never spoke more than a few terse words, asking how his ribs felt or commanding him to eat. He answered honestly but briefly, instinctively understanding that whatever fragile connection existed between them would shatter under the weight of too many words. The other prisoners began to whisper. They called him Chief's Pet and Blue Lover when they thought he couldn't hear. The human prisoners stopped making eye contact with him entirely, as if he had betrayed some unspoken code of their shared humanity. Reich ignored them all. He focused instead on healing, on breathing through the pain, on surviving one more day and then another. And if sometimes his eyes lingered on the door long after the chief had departed, waiting for her return, well, that was no one's business but his own. The day of the selection dawned hot and cloudless, the air already shimmering with heat as the prisoners were marched from the barracks to the holding pens beneath the arena. Reich's wounds had healed enough for him to walk unaided, though his ribs still ached with each breath. The chief hadn't visited in 3 days, and he tried to ignore the hollow feeling her absence had created. The holding pen stank of fear and anticipation. Guards paced between the metal cages, occasionally prodding a prisoner with shock sticks for their own amusement. Above, the crowd's roar was already building, hungry for the day's entertainment. "Today's matches are special," one of the guards announced, his voice carrying over the nervous murmurs of the prisoners. 10 trials, 10 deaths. His lipless mouth stretched into what might have been a smile. Or perhaps 11 if we're fortunate. One by one, prisoners were selected and paired against each other. Some wept, some roared in defiance. Most simply stood in numb resignation as their names were called and their fates sealed. Reich waited, his face expressionless, his mind empty of everything but the rhythm of his own breathing. In, out, each breath of victory, each moment alive a defiance. The final pairing made the arena pause. "Reich," the announcer called, his amplified voice echoing throughout the complex. "Human, survivor of Trial 1. Reich stepped forward, his bare feet silent on the stone floor. The guard unlocked his cage with a sneer, shoving him toward the ramp that led up to the arena. And facing him, a dramatic pause perfectly timed to maximize the crowd's anticipation. The chief herself. Gasps rippled through the holding pens. The other prisoners stared at Reich with a mixture of pity and awe. The guards exchanged glances, their usual arrogance momentarily disrupted by surprise. Reich's heart hammered against his injured ribs, but his face remained impassive. So this was why she hadn't visited. This was what her strange interest had been leading to all along. They were escorted separately to the arena preparation chambers, small cells where combatants waited for their turn to die or kill. Reich sat on the stone bench, his hands resting lightly on his knees, his breathing steady despite the pain in his side. The door opened. She stood there, her blue skin gleaming in the low light, her silver braids now woven with red ribbons that matched the simple fighting garment she wore. "If you kill me," he said without preamble, "kill me quickly." The chief tilted her head slightly, studying him with that same clinical detachment she had shown on their first meeting. "I don't enjoy prolonged death," she replied, her voice cool and measured. "But you make a strange request. Because for the first time, I don't want to die." Something flickered in her eyes, a shadow of emotion quickly suppressed. "Not just you," she said, the words so quiet they might have been imagined. Before he could respond, guards appeared behind her, signaling it was time. The chief straightened, her face once again an emotionless mask. "When we enter the arena," she said formally, "I will offer you no mercy." Reich nodded once. "I expect none." That night, after the guards had left, the chief returned to Reich's isolation cell. The arena preparation chambers were designed for solitary confinement, no contact with other prisoners, no outside influence to disrupt the delicate psychological balance required for maximum spectacle. She entered without announcement, the door sliding open and closed with barely a sound. Reich sat in the same position as before, back straight, hands on knees, breathing measured and deep despite his injuries. "You should be sleeping," she said, remaining near the door, her tall figure silhouetted against the dim light. "So should you," he replied, not opening his eyes. A silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken questions. The cell was small enough that he could sense her presence, the subtle shift in air currents, the faint scent that he had come to associate with her, like metal and rain. "Why did you help me?" he asked finally, opening his eyes to look at her. "My rib, the bandages, the water. Why?" The chief's face remained impassive, but something in her posture changed, a minute relaxation, as if she had been holding herself rigid and only now allowed the tension to ease. "Because you said thank you," she answered, her voice quieter than he had ever heard it. "No one has thanked me for pain in a very long time. It wasn't the pain I thanked you for. It was the alignment." "I know." She moved further into the cell, her movements fluid and controlled. "That's why it mattered." Another silence, this one different, less strained, more contemplative. "Tomorrow," she said, "they expect me to kill you." "I know. They will not accept anything less than blood." "I know that too." She studied him, her eyes reflecting the dim light. "What will you do?" Reich met her gaze steadily. "What I must. What you must. We each have our roles to play. And if I choose a different role?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to fully acknowledge. "Then I'll follow your lead," he replied simply. She moved closer until she stood directly before him. From this position, he had to look up to meet her eyes, a deliberate choice on her part, a reminder of their respective places in the hierarchy of this world. "They will be watching," she said. "Every move, every hesitation, every decision. They always are. Not like tomorrow." Her voice took on an edge of something he couldn't quite identify, urgency perhaps, or warning. "Tomorrow is special. The governors will be present. The high command. This isn't just entertainment, it's politics." Reich nodded slowly, understanding dawning. "And you're supposed to demonstrate your loyalty by killing a human who has caught too much of my attention." Her lips curved in a smile that held no warmth. "Publicly, brutally, without mercy. And if you don't, then they will kill us both." She stated it as simple fact without emotion. "And everyone who has seen us together." Reich absorbed this in silence, his expression unchanged. Then with careful deliberation, he rose to his feet, standing before her at his full height. They were nearly of equal stature, their eyes level. "Then we should give them what they want," he said quietly, "until we decide otherwise." Something flickered in her eyes, approval perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. She didn't respond verbally, but her slight nod was answer enough. As she turned to leave, Reich spoke again. "I've never asked your name, not your title. Your name." She paused at the door, her back to him. For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then so softly he almost missed it. "Zira." The door closed behind her, leaving Reich alone in the darkness once more. He lay back on the narrow bench, staring at the ceiling. Sleep seemed impossible with tomorrow looming over him like a shadow. Yet somehow his eyes grew heavy, his breathing slowed. Sometime in the deepest part of the night, he jerked awake, sensing rather than hearing a presence in his cell. She stood in the corner, a darker shadow among shadows, her silver braids catching what little light filtered through the small ventilation grate. "You still think I'll kill you tomorrow?" Her voice was soft, almost gentle in the darkness. Reich sat up slowly, wincing at the pain in his ribs. "No," he replied. "I think you'll set something on fire." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. In the dim light, he could just make out her eyes. Luminous, intent, searching his face for something only she could name. Then she was gone, moving so silently that he might have imagined her presence entirely. Only the lingering scent of metal and rain assured him that she had been there at all. He was marched up the ramp and into the blinding sunlight of the arena. The crowd's roar washed over him like a physical force, nearly driving him to his knees. Sand stretched before him, stained dark in places with the blood of previous matches. Across the arena, another entrance opened. The chief emerged, her presence commanding instant attention from every corner of the massive space. The crowd's reaction to her appearance dwarfed their response to Reich. Adoration and fear mingled into a deafening crescendo of sound. She didn't flinch at the noise. Neither did he. They were brought to the center of the arena, weapons tossed at their feet, crude but effective blades, a short spear, metal-studded fighting gloves. The announcer recited the rules, though everyone knew there was only one: survive. As the guards retreated to the edges of the arena, she broke the silence between them. "Don't insult me by going easy." Her voice was low, meant for him alone despite the audio enhancers that would carry their words to the eager audience. Reich looked at the weapons at his feet. Then deliberately he picked up the blade, testing its weight and balance with the practiced eye of someone who had held weapons before. The crowd leaned forward in anticipation. Then he dropped it. The blade fell to the sand with a soft thud that somehow cut through the arena's cacophony. "I don't plan to fight you," he said simply. Her eyes sharpened, narrowing to slits. The crowd murmured in confusion. "Then die on your knees," she responded, her voice hard as stone. The gong sounded. The match began. They circled in silence, dust rising around their feet in small clouds. The crowd's initial excitement had faded to confused murmurs as they watched the strange dance unfold. She lunged, her blade flashing in the sunlight. Reich moved just enough to avoid the killing edge, the blade slicing a thin line across his shoulder instead of plunging into his heart. Blood welled, dripped onto the sand. No counterattack. The chief's face hardened. She struck again, a vicious blow that caught him across the chest, reopening one of his barely healed wounds. Reich staggered but did not fall, did not fight back. The crowd began to boo, their bloodlust unsatisfied by this one-sided display. Some threw debris into the arena, empty food containers, pieces of fabric, whatever they could find. With brutal precision, she drove her heel into his damaged ribs, the same spot she had kicked before. The impact drove him to his knees, face contorted in pain. But still, his hands remained at his sides. No defensive posture, no attempt to shield himself. She circled him, her blade tip brushing his throat. "You shame me," she hissed, her voice low and furious. "Fight or die with dignity, at least." Blood trickled from Reich's mouth as he looked up at her, his eyes clear despite the pain. "I'd rather die honest than win pretending," he said, breathing heavily. "You gave me back breath. I won't repay that with blood." He glanced at the crowd, then back to her. "You can kill me, but I won't be your proof." Her face contorted with something that might have been rage or frustration or something else entirely. With a roar that silenced the crowd, she slammed into him, driving him backward until they both crashed to the ground. The impact sent fresh pain lancing through his barely healed ribs. The blade was at his throat, its edge pressing just hard enough to draw a thin line of blood. His eyes didn't close. He stared up at her, his gaze steady and unafraid. Her hand trembled. A drop of sweat, or was it a tear, fell from her face onto his. The crowd screamed, "Kill him! Kill him! Kill him!" The chant built, thousands of voices merging into a single, bloodthirsty entity demanding satisfaction. But she didn't. She looked at him. Really looked at him, her eyes searching his for something only she could name. Then at the guards who had begun to move forward, sensing something had gone wrong with the carefully choreographed spectacle. Then she threw the blade, not at him, at the announcer who stood on his elevated platform, still leading the crowd in their chant for blood. The blade spun through the air with deadly precision, embedding itself straight through his throat. The chanting cut off abruptly, replaced by screams of a different kind as the announcer clutched at the metal protruding from his neck. Dark blood spurting between his fingers before he collapsed. Chaos erupted. The crowd scattered in all directions, trampling each other in their desperation to escape whatever was happening. Guards rushed forward, weapons drawn, their formations dissolving into confusion as they tried to comprehend the unthinkable. The chief had turned against her own. She stood between them and the human, her body a blue barrier against the approaching threat. Blood, not hers, not his, spattered across her skin like macabre decoration. "He is not yours anymore," she declared, her voice carrying across the arena despite the pandemonium. The guards hesitated, their conditioning to obey her warring with the clear evidence of her betrayal. Then as one they aimed their weapons. She growled, a sound more animal than sentient, and crouched in a fighting stance. Then Reich stood, blood dripping from the cut at his throat and the various wounds across his body. He stepped in front of her, placing himself between the chief and the guard's weapons. "You'll die," she whispered, genuine confusion in her voice. He didn't answer. Didn't need to. His actions spoke clearly enough. One of the guards fired. Reich moved with unexpected speed, pulling the chief aside as the energy bolt scorched the sand where they had stood. In the same fluid motion, he rolled forward, coming up with one of the discarded weapons from the sand. Together, they fought. Not for escape. There was nowhere to run in the enclosed arena. For defiance. For the simple, powerful statement that they would not submit to the roles assigned to them by the brutal system that had brought them together. The first wave of guards fell quickly. Their training hadn't prepared them for the chief's betrayal or for a human who fought with such skill. Reich moved with a fluid precision that belied his injuries. Each strike economical, each defense perfectly timed. The chief was raw power alongside him, her blue skin darkening with exertion and rage as she cut through her former subordinates. "Second gate patrol inbound," she warned, sensing rather than seeing the reinforcements. "Heavy weapons." Reich nodded, already shifting his position to cover her left flank. They had fought together for mere minutes, yet already moved like a coordinated unit, anticipating each other's actions without need for words. The arena doors burst open. A squad of elite guards poured in, carrying pulse rifles and shock staffs, weapons designed for crowd control and mass casualties. At their center strode a massive figure in ceremonial armor, clearly their commander. "Zayara," the commander roared, his voice amplified by his helmet. "Stand down and you may yet live." The chief, Zayara, spat blood onto the sand. "Come and make me, Dravik." The commander signaled and his troops opened fire. Energy bolts tore through the air, turning sand to glass where they struck. Reich and Zayara dove in opposite directions, rolling behind the meager cover of fallen guards and arena debris. A bolt grazed Reich's shoulder, searing flesh and cauterizing it in the same instant. He hissed in pain but kept moving, circling wide to flank the firing squad. From the corner of his eye, he saw Zayara doing the same in the opposite direction. A perfect pincer movement, as if they had planned it. Dravik noticed too late. By the time he realized their strategy, Reich had already taken down 2 of his rear guards with silent efficiency. Zayara struck from the other side, her movements a blur of lethal grace as she disarmed and disabled 3 more. The remaining guards turned inward, firing wildly at the threats now inside their perimeter. In the confusion, a stray bolt caught Zayara in the thigh. She stumbled, momentarily vulnerable, as Dravik raised his weapon for a killing shot. Reich didn't hesitate. He threw himself forward, tackling the commander with enough force to drive them both to the ground. The shot went wild, harmlessly into the sky. Drvik's armored fist connected with Reich's already broken ribs, sending white-hot agony through his body. Still, he held on, grappling with the much larger opponent, buying Ziara precious seconds to recover. She did more than recover. As Dravik flung Reich aside and rose to his feet, Ziara struck from behind, driving a guard's shock staff through a gap in his ceremonial armor. The commander convulsed, his body outlined in crackling energy before collapsing to the sand. Reich struggled to his feet, breathing in ragged gasps, fresh blood soaking his side where the ribs had punctured through skin. Ziara limped to him, her own wound leaving a trail of blue droplets in the sand. "You shouldn't have done that," she said, her voice tight with pain, and something else. Concern, perhaps. "He would have killed you." "He was going to kill you," Reich replied simply. Their eyes met in shared understanding, a moment of recognition amidst the chaos of battle. Then as one, they turned to face the next wave of guards now pouring through the arena entrances. Back to back in the arena, they moved as if they had trained together for years, blades flashing, sand flying as they pivoted and struck and defended. The chief's superior strength and speed complemented Reich's unexpected skill and uncanny ability to anticipate attacks. The watching crowd, those who hadn't managed to flee, had never seen such madness. A chief fighting alongside a human prisoner against her own guards. Guards fell. More came. Reich took a glancing blow to his side that reopened his barely healed ribs. The chief's left arm hung limp after blocking a shock stick with her bare skin. Still they fought, the sand around them darkening with blood both blue and red. "We need to reach the east gate," she gasped during a brief respite as the guards regrouped. "There's a passage." "I know," he interrupted, surprising her. "I've been mapping the complex since I arrived. 3 lefts, a right, then down, leads to the waste disposal tunnels." She stared at him, reassessing yet again. "You never planned to die here." His smile was grim and bloody. "I never planned to die anywhere." The next wave of guards approached more cautiously, having witnessed what happened to their comrades. Reich and the chief exchanged a glance. An entire conversation compressed into a single look, then moved as one toward the eastern edge of the arena. Hours passed. Night fell. The fires that had broken out during the fighting were extinguished, leaving the arena in darkness broken only by the distant glow of emergency lighting. Bodies lay scattered across the sand. Guards mostly, though some unfortunate spectators had been caught in the crossfire. The complex was abandoned, the remaining guards having retreated to secure the perimeter and prevent further escapes. Only 2 figures walked into the desert beyond the arena's outer wall, having emerged from a drainage tunnel half a kilometer away. The darkness concealed them as they moved steadily eastward, away from the complex and toward the distant mountains that shimmered like a mirage on the horizon. Reich limped, his hand pressed against his side where blood still seeped through his fingers, his ribs once again broken. The chief walked beside him, silent, her injured arm bound with a strip torn from her fighting garment. The rhythm of their steps matched despite their injuries, an unconscious synchronization that spoke of something deeper than mere alliance of convenience. Blood trailed behind them, droplets darkening the sand, his red, hers blue, mingling together in their wake. She stumbled suddenly, her injured leg giving way on the uneven ground. Without hesitation, Reich caught her, his arm sliding around her waist to steady her. Neither spoke, but she did not pull away from his touch. When they resumed walking, her voice broke the silence. "I could have killed you in the arena." "Too late now," he replied, his voice rough with exhaustion and pain. Reich stopped abruptly, head tilted, listening. A faint sound carried on the night breeze, distant but distinct, mechanical and purposeful. "That's not wind," he said quietly. Ziara's eyes fixed on the darkness behind them, her expression grim. "They're hunting us." The sound grew incrementally louder, the whine of hover engines, the rhythmic thud of search drones. The desert offered little cover, nowhere to hide except in the vast openness itself. On the horizon behind them, a pinprick of orange light flared and grew. Flames rose from the direction of the arena complex, illuminating the night sky with an ominous glow. Black smoke billowed upward, visible even at this distance. "They're burning the barracks," Ziara said, her voice tight. "Eliminating witnesses. Anyone who saw us together." Reich's jaw clenched, his thoughts turning to the other prisoners, humans and aliens alike who had shared that cramped space with him. people whose only crime had been capture. This isn't just about us escaping, he realized aloud. This is about hiding what happened, about keeping your people from knowing their chief chose a human over them. Ziara nodded grimly. Dravik won't stop until he's erased every trace of what we did, including us. The distant flames reflected in their eyes as they stood side by side, watching the evidence of how far their pursuers would go. The hunt wasn't just about recapture, it was about erasure. We need to move faster, she said, straightening despite her injury, determination hardening her features. Reich nodded, adjusting his grip to better support her weight. Together they quickened their pace, their shared shadow stretching long and distorted across the sand. She looked at him, her face ghostly in the starlight. You really thought I'd scream? She asked finally. I thought you'd beg, she admitted. They all do, eventually. I did. He looked at her, his face ghostly in the starlight, but not out loud. She stopped walking, looked up at the stars that crowded the night sky, their light harsh and clear in the desert air. Then at him, her expression unreadable in the darkness. I'll never touch your ribs again, she said, the words carrying the weight of a solemn oath. He smirked, wincing, as the expression pulled at a cut on his lip. Good, because next time I'll scream, just to mess with you. She didn't laugh, but she didn't walk away either. Instead, after a moment that stretched between them like the vast desert stretching to the horizon, she reached out slowly and placed her hand on his shoulder. The first touch between them that wasn't part of violence or survival. Her fingers were cool against his skin, the contact brief but deliberate. We should reach the foothills by dawn, she said, her voice matter-of-fact once more. There are caves there, places to hide while you heal. While we heal, he corrected gently. She nodded once, acknowledging the correction and everything it implied. Then they resumed walking, two silhouettes growing smaller against the endless desert, moving steadily toward the uncertain promise of dawn. He had thanked her for kicking him, and that was when she decided he was worth saving. The cave was deep, its entrance hidden by a cascade of desert vines that had somehow found enough moisture to thrive in this barren landscape. Inside, natural chambers extended into the mountain, some large enough to stand in comfortably, others mere crawl spaces connecting larger rooms. Reich had found it just as dawn broke, his tracking instincts proving as reliable as his fighting skills. By then, Ziara could barely walk, the wound on her thigh seeping blue blood despite the makeshift bandage they had fashioned from his tattered shirt. Now she sat propped against the cave wall, her normally vibrant blue skin dull with pain and exhaustion. The wound was worse than she had let on. The energy bolt had cauterized the surface, but internal damage continued to bleed. Reich knelt beside her, examining the injury with careful hands. His own wounds had been relegated to secondary concern. The broken ribs, the cuts and bruises, all ignored in favor of keeping her alive. You need proper medical attention, he said, his voice echoing slightly in the stone chamber. As do you, she replied, watching him with eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light filtering through the vines. I've had worse. So have I. They shared a brief smile at the absurdity of their situation. Two enemies become allies, comparing battle scars in a hidden cave while an entire complex of armed guards search for them. Reich turned his attention back to her wound. The bleeding isn't stopping. I need to make a compression bandage, but we don't have... He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes falling on his wrist where the cloth she had given him days ago remained tied, dirty but intact. Without hesitation, he untied it. No, she said, reaching out to stop him. Not that. He met her eyes. It's the only clean fabric we have. It was a gift, and now I'm giving it back. His voice was gentle but firm. Besides, you need it more than I do. Before she could protest further, he carefully folded the cloth into a pad and pressed it against the worst part of her wound. She hissed in pain but didn't pull away. Hold this, he instructed, guiding her hand to maintain pressure on the bandage. Then, tearing another strip from his already shredded shirt, he secured the pad in place with a tight binding. There, he said, sitting back to examine his handiwork. That should slow the bleeding until we figure out something better. She nodded, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than thanks. They had moved beyond gratitude for such small kindnesses. Survival now depended on mutual aid. They'll find us eventually, she said after a moment of silence. Dravik survived. He won't stop until he has both our heads. Why? Reich asked, settling beside her against the cave wall, close enough to share warmth, but not touching. What did you do that was so unforgivable? Ziara's laugh was bitter. I showed mercy. I questioned. I failed to play my role. Her eyes found his in the dim light. I saw you as a person, not a tool for entertainment or politics. That's enough for them to want me dead. And me? You refused to die properly. You made me choose. Her voice softened. And then you saved my life, after I nearly took yours. Silence fell between them, comfortable despite the gravity of their situation. Outside, the desert wind whispered through the vines, creating patterns of light and shadow that danced across the cave floor. What happens now? Reich asked finally. If we survive this? Ziara considered the question, her face thoughtful. I don't know. I've never deserted before. First time for everything. Indeed. A ghost of a smile crossed her lips. There are other settlements, far from here. Places where they don't care who you were, only what you can offer now. We could go there, together. The words were a question as much as a statement. She turned to look at him fully, studying his face with an intensity that might have been uncomfortable had they not already seen each other at their most vulnerable. Why would you want that? After what I am, what I've done? Reich didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of silver hair from her face. The gesture was tentative, explorative, the touch of someone learning a new language. Because you saw me, he said simply. Not just a prisoner, not just a human, me. Her hand rose to catch his, holding it against her cheek for a moment before letting it fall. And what is that worth? In a world that wants us both dead? Everything, he replied without hesitation. It's worth everything. The certainty in his voice seemed to reach something deep within her. Her posture shifted subtly, some of the tension leaving her body despite the pain of her wounds. Rest, she said, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. We have a long journey ahead, and you're still bleeding. Reich nodded, the adrenaline of their escape finally fading, leaving him lightheaded with exhaustion and blood loss. He shifted to a more comfortable position, careful not to disturb her injured leg. As consciousness began to slip away, he felt her hand find his in the darkness. A deliberate contact, fingers intertwining with his own. The last thing he heard before sleep claimed him was her voice, quiet but clear. Thank you for the bandage. The night passed in fragments of consciousness, pain, thirst, the soft sound of Ziara's breathing beside him. When dawn filtered through the vine curtain, Reich opened his eyes to find her watching him, her gaze intent and thoughtful. You look better, he observed, noting the improved color of her skin, the clearer focus in her eyes. So do you, she replied, though that's not saying much. A ghost of a smile passed between them, fragile, tentative, but real. For a moment, they were just two beings taking comfort in each other's survival. The weight of their shared ordeal temporarily lifted. She shifted, wincing slightly as she adjusted her injured leg. The bandage, once a gift from her to him, now returned, was stained blue with her blood, the fabric nearly saturated. We'll need to change that soon, Reich said, nodding toward the wound. With what? Her gesture encompassed the empty cave. We have nothing. We have this. Reich reached to his throat, untying a thin cord that had gone unnoticed until now. From it hung a small metal object, a key or perhaps some kind of tool. Took it from one of the guards during the fight. It's an access module for the outpost supply caches. Ziara's eyes widened slightly. There's a cache in these mountains. Northern slope, half a day's journey. Then that's where we go next. He offered the cord to her. Together! She hesitated, then reached out, not taking the key, but instead closing his fingers around it. Keep it. I have too many things that unlock cages. Her hand lingered on his. But I'm ready for something that opens doors. You want revenge? She asked suddenly, the question hanging in the air between them. Against those who broke you? Against me for what I was. Reich considered the question, his eyes tracing the patterns of light on the cave ceiling. When he finally answered, his voice was soft but certain. No, I want a world where you don't need to kick broken ribs to get noticed. Her breath caught, a small, involuntary sound in the quiet cave. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a shared vision that neither had been able to articulate until now. "Then let's build it," she said, the words a promise more binding than any oath. "Starting today." He had thanked her for kicking him, and that was when she decided he was worth saving. Now she had thanked him for giving back what she had given, and in that moment, they both understood that whatever path lay ahead, they would walk it together. Not an ending, but a beginning.